Hello, and welcome to Ars Biblica, the Art of the Bible. I'm your host, Stephen Fenley, and together with pastor and scholar Jeffrey Ernessy, we're going to be talking about the ways that the 30% of the Bible that is poetry figures into our modern lives. Jeffrey, welcome.
Hey, Steve. So good to be here again.
Yes. So last time we were talking widely and theoretically about this idea of poetry as increasing the gravity of ideas. And we're going to continue talking about that and so much other material that is available to us.
So, yeah, one of the things that I wanted to say about that, particularly how poetry increases the gravity of what's being said. In English, we have this idea that we get when we're kids, when we're introduced to poetry, that what makes something poetry is that it rhymes. That's not, and then you get older and you find out, oh, poetry doesn't have to rhyme, and it's kind of an astonishing revelation for some people, right? They didn't know that you could do poetry and not rhyme. But the real measure of poetry, what makes poetry poetry, is that poetry is concentrated meaning. So one of the questions that I get asked sometimes, particularly by younger people, by teenagers, when we're talking about this, is why put the text in poetry? Why in the Bible is there so much poetry?
Why even bother to arrange
Because
it that way?
because it seems like you could just say it.
Right.
That's the question. Why didn't he just say it? You know, the poetry of it seems like at first a barrier to the meaning. But the truth is that once you learn to think poetically, once you get a handle on how it is poetry works, then you have access to that concentrated meaning.
That's right. It was the same. It was the same in my study of Shakespeare. Once I discovered some certain signposts, punctuation being one of them, suddenly it becomes not only understandable, but you begin to perceive the genius in the way that it's organized.
So, for instance, I wanted to look at Psalm 1 today, because this is a really good example of some of the devices. We're talking about poetic devices.
Psalm 1. Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with scoffers. But they delight in doing everything the Lord wants. Day and night they think about his law. They are like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit each season without fail. Their leaves never wither, and in all they do, they prosper. But this is not true of the wicked. They are like worthless chaff, scattered by the wind. They will be condemned at the time of judgment. Sinners will have no place among the godly. For the Lord watches over the path of the godly, but the path of the wicked leads to destruction.
Now, it's very straightforward, relatively speaking, but you immediately meet in the text a couple of devices that the Hebrew poets used. And it's actually kind of brilliant. And if you, like I do and like you do, believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, you have to give God credit, because there are so many things that you can do in poetry in one language that don't translate into another language. It's very difficult to translate rhyme. For instance, it's very difficult to translate alliteration or assonance. Alliteration, when successive things start with the same sound, or assonance, where the vowels are the same for several syllables in a row. Very hard to translate that into another language.
There's that great joke from Educating Rita where he says assonance is getting the rhyme wrong, which I always loved.
But the one poetic device that is the usual organizing principle for Hebrew poetry translates extremely well. And it's what we call Hebrew parallelism. So in the structure that we were just looking at, the verses that we were just looking at, we meet what's called a bicolon and a tricolon. The opening text is tricolonic. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. You see, it's got that triple structure.
Right.
And then the next verse is a bicolon. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. You say it over here one way, his delight is in the law of the Lord. Well, what does that look like? On the law he meditates day and night. Say it differently over here. And those structures of paralleling the idea through multiple iterations is what makes Hebrew poetry poetry. That's the underlying mark. They would recognize that as poetry no matter what.
Well, and repetition itself is a poetic device. You know, one thinks of Edgar Allan Poe's The Bells, the Bells, the Bells, and so many other examples.
Well, there's an old saying, and I can't remember who said it. I'll have to look it up later and maybe reintroduce it in a subsequent episode. There's an old saying that in art, the eye craves the novel, the ear craves the familiar.
Oh, that's a wonderful saying, yeah.
And so that repetition serves the ear. And that's one of the things we were talking about last week, too, is that the idea of serving the ear. You know, we have this habit of reading the Bible. We'll sit down with a text and we'll get our coffee and we'll read it silently to ourselves in the morning, and it helps our faith. And I'm not knocking that in any way, but the truth of the matter is the text of Scripture in general, and the poetic texts in particular, were meant to be read aloud. They weren't something to be read; they were something to be said.
Right. That's one of the things that playwrights do. Is playwrights will write a play, and then the next thing they've got to do is read it out loud and hear the way it sounds in the air.
Because there are ideas that you can have in your head, and it sounds great.
That's right.
In your head, but then when you hear it spoken, it's awful.
That's right.
And so the texts of the Bible serve the voice and the ear. And this one in particular, that opening tricolon, right? Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. It's a poetic way of saying he doesn't hang out with bad people. Now, why didn't it just say that? Because it goes deeper. Because there are these different ways that bad people can interfere with your life, right? He doesn't walk in the counsel. He doesn't listen to the wicked. He doesn't stand in the way of sinners, right? He's not walking with them. He doesn't sit in the seat of scoffers. He doesn't hang out and sit around with them.
Right.
But
it certainly gives a more complete picture of the person he's talking about.
Right.
You know, a more, what would you say, a more human picture.
Exactly. And then the text goes on. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season. Notice there's again the bicolon, right? The parallelism.
And I love the fact that embedded in that line. Read that line again.
He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season, and its leaf does not wither. That's
I love the fact that it takes a moral and pulls it into time and says, if you just do what's right, it's going to pay off.
But notice that it's embedded in an image, and this is another poetic device, right? That we don't just say, we don't just come out and say it. If you'll do this, it'll last for a long time, right?
Right. Nobody's going to be inspired by that.
He is like, it's simile, right? He is like a tree. Well, how is he like a tree? Does he have bark and roots? No. Like a tree planted by streams of water. You picture the tree by the water, and the water flows by, and the tree is comfortable and well watered, that yields its fruit in season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. And notice then what we have is two images seated side by side. We have over here a tree, big plant, with roots and branches and leaves, and over here, chaff, which is the leavings of grain.
And that's another great poetic device, the use of antithesis.
Yes.
To draw comparisons and contrasts between ideas.
And so then, therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. Again, it's the Hebrew parallelism. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And then, again, it's the antithesis, the righteous, the wicked.
Right. And, and it occurs to me that here we are at the very first psalm. And it is setting the tone for a theme that's going to run through all 150 of those.
Well, and that's actually another one of the things that I wanted to talk about this morning, is that the Psalms in particular, as a collection, are this odd kind of book in that it's an anthology within the greater anthology.
Right.
And so the Psalms were composed over a great deal of time, and not with any view to they're going to be in a book someday. That's
right. That's really interesting, isn't it?
So we have psalms that are attributed to David. We have psalms that are attributed to Asaph, the prophet. We have at least one psalm attributed to Moses. And so there's this
There's anonymous psalms.
And yes, and there's this huge chronological range across the psalms. And we don't imagine that when the writer of Psalm 1, which is an anonymous psalm, we don't imagine that the writer sat down and was like, Psalm 1.
Right.
He didn't know he was writing, or maybe he did, because it's quite possible that this psalm was composed to be the first psalm in a collection. So it may be, this is just my personal headcanon here. I don't have any hard proof of it, but it's reasonable that the editor of the Psalms, the librarian of the Psalms, may have composed Psalm 1 to kind of go at the front and be like, this will be the first one in the collection. And then the collection goes from there.
Is Psalm 1 attributed as...
No, it's completely, there's no attribution. And so it's quite possible that it was the psalm arranger himself composing a psalm to go at the head of the collection. We don't know. But it's an interesting thing, because there are all of these poems that were selected out of a greater amount, right? We don't know what the size of the total amount of poems that the arranger was selecting from. It probably much greater. The number is suspicious. That it's 150. That's a committee number. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I always picture it, and again, this is just my own personal headcanon, I have no proof of this, but I always picture that there was maybe a committee of guys selecting the Psalms that we're gonna put a book out, and it's gonna be the book that we're gonna sing from. And how many should it be? And there was one guy on the committee who was like a tight 100. We should be, and there was another guy who was like, a big messy 200. And there was one guy who was like, look, we're going to compromise.
Split the difference.
Split the difference. That's just, it always strikes me as a compromise number, 150. I don't know. But I say that by way of saying that the Psalms are an interesting book, because it's always pointing forward at other Psalms, and forward in a prophetic way, even further ahead in time, but then it's also always pointing backward. It's always pointing outside of itself. In particular, it's always pointing at what are called the law and testimonies. So you can't get it all far. In fact, it's right there at the beginning. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. We're 2 verses in, and already the writer is going, look over there. Look at the law. Look what's in the law. And on his law he meditates day and night. And so there's always this idea in the Psalms that the book of Psalms itself is not sufficient. That you...
Is there any archaeological evidence? Has anyone ever discovered any of the Psalms that weren't included? There must be songs that people found.
Well, no, actually, not very many.
Yeah,
I'd say this.
I guess once that decision was made.
Well, and you have to remember the disruptions of the culture,
Right.
the way that these people who put this book together. This is the book they saved.
Right, right.
From every scrape, from every empire that rolled over them, this is what they saved from the fire.
Yeah.
And so all kinds of other things got lost. There are other books that are composed sort of in an imitation of the Psalms. There are other books that sound psalmic, so to speak, but nothing like this collection of 150. And it's really quite amazing. But one of the interesting things that the Psalms are always doing is not just pointing, like remember the law, remember the testimonies, but alluding. And that's an important idea, that there are allusions, not illusions, but allusions.
And once again, another poetic device.
It's another poetic device. And so there is, in fact, in Psalm 1, an allusion, a series of sort of a running allusion here at the beginning of Psalms to the beginning of Torah. Now, you don't see it at first. You have to kind of dig it out of the text, right? But if you, especially if you're reading it in Hebrew, blessed is the man. Well, in Hebrew, that's ha'adam. And it's unescapable, right? You immediately are thinking about
Adam.
ha'adam, right? The man. Now, the Psalms has this habit, and Hebrew poetry in general, has this habit of generalizing with the particular and particularizing in the general.
Share that with me. Well,
So when the text says, blessed is the man, you know as a reader of poetry that means anybody.
everybody.
Blessed is the man who doesn't do these things, right? Doesn't walk, doesn't sit, doesn't stand, right? But you don't think that's just one guy, right? Blessed is the man. Who is he? Does he live in my town? Right? It generalizes with the particular, uses the man, and then sometimes the opposite is done, where it talks about everybody, the nations, but
Talking to you.
it's talking to you exactly.
That's one of the things that I thought was so brilliant about Mel Gibson's Apocalypto. He's making a movie about the fall of not just one, but two entire civilizations, and we see it all through the eyes of one guy.
One guy, yeah. Well, so here in the text, blessed is the man. And you are immediately catapulted back to the Genesis story.
Right.
Well, what does he not do? He does not walk in the counsel of the wicked. What happens in the Genesis story?
He walks in the counsel. Well, at least they start off walking in the counsel of God.
But then they end up
Going down the wrong
walking
path.
in the counsel of the wicked. That's exactly what happens in the text. So this psalm is like, don't be like Adam. Don't walk in the counsel of the wicked. Don't stand in the way of sinners. Don't sit in the seat of scoffers. But then it says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. Well, what happens in the Adam story? How big is the law at that point?
Well, it's pretty big.
In the Adam story, how long? How many commandments are there in the Adam story?
Oh, there are no commandments.
There's one.
There's one. Don't eat of the tree.
Don't eat the fruit, right? Don't eat the fruit of the tree. It is a one commandment Torah. That's it. One commandment. And if he had delighted in that rule and meditated on it day and night, things would have gone very different. The idea there is that the reason for the fall is that Adam was already considering the one rule onerous.
Right.
It was
so human.
It was not delightful. It annoyed him, right? And
One thing.
that you can't do.
One thing. Other than that, you can do just about anything you want.
Well, and this is a problem with rules in general. And this is a Pauline idea, that the unavoidable problem of a rule is it points at the thing it forbids.
Right.
You know, he says, I would never have coveted if there hadn't been a rule about coveting, but the rule created all kind of coveting in me.
You can't have any cookies until dinner's over.
Well, now I know there's cookies.
Right. I know.
And now I'm thinking about the cookies. Right? So it's the same problem. The problem with law is it inevitably points at the thing it's trying to forbid, and then you're thinking about the thing it's trying to forbid. So he didn't delight. And that's an interesting idea. The idea of delighting in the text. And we talked a little bit about that.
We did
last time.
You know, and part of, you know, now that you say that, I'm thinking maybe the reason there's so much poetry in the Bible and God has put so much emphasis on kind of creative expression is because he's trying to drive that delight.
It's so much easier to delight in a text when it's beautiful.
Isn't that the truth?
But now I cannot forbear to continue just for a moment here, because
Please.
The next bit, he is like a tree. And if you're already thinking about the Adam story and there's the snake, he's like a tree. Well, how is he like a tree? Planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season. We're already thinking about a tree and fruit. And then it says, and his leaf does not wither. All right, what happens in the Adam story when they realize they're naked? What do?
Cover themselves with leaves.
And what's going to happen to those leaves?
They're going to wither.
Because they're not attached. They're not connected to the tree. They've been plucked from the tree.
They're not connected in some sense to the truth.
Right. Well, and this is the thing. So the leaves themselves in the Adam story become an image for what's going to happen to Adam and Eve, right? Now, because you've eaten from the fruit, you will surely die. This guy, this Adam, in our psalm, because he delights in the law of the Lord, his leaf will not wither. And it's almost comedic. Like if you are picturing Adam fig leafing it up in the garden, and his leaves are, he's going to have to get new leaves again, right? Which is why God makes them garments of skin, right? Because that's not as disposable as leaves. But this guy, his leaf does not wither. And that's really interesting.
And the suggestion there, of course, in my mind, the sense of that is,
this is the thing that just happened to you is the thing that happens when we read poetry. That there are ideas that are too deep for words, too deep for language, but we feel them. We feel the impact of this simile, because, and it's an odd simile, because what happens is then Adam and the tree kind of overlap one another.
right, the image gets,
Yeah, because it's not an allegory.
right.
It's just a simile. But then also, the wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. And you have to remember that in the text, the wind, right, is the same word that is used on the one hand for the Spirit of God hovered over the water. It's ruach is the Hebrew word. And on the other hand, it's also the word for, we translate it that God used to walk with Adam in the cool of the day. It's literally the wind of the day, because it's when the breeze would blow. And so the image of the wind driving the chaff away is a God image.
Right.
And it's almost this idea of setting up a what if. What if Adam hadn't? What if the wicked had been unsuccessful in his counsel? And then the wind drives the wicked away like chaff. And so you get to put yourself in the story.
Right.
You get to be like Adam. The psalmist is saying, hey, you are Adam 1.2. you get the same shot that Adam gets. You have the same wicked counselor trying to advise you, but if you just will delight in Torah, then you'll be sitting pretty, and the wind will drive the wicked away. And none of that is said outright in the text.
Right.
It's all done by allusion, and that's what I think is so interesting and so cool.
It's fascinating, and that's just one of, I mean, gosh, how many poetic devices have poets come up with over the thousands of years?
I'm sure somewhere there's a catalog.
You know, here we are having conversations about that, and this one, allusion, and we're going to find these come back over and over and over again, because these are the building blocks that a poet uses to arrange words into larger, what we would call larger meanings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That you know, we're you know, in theater we talk about it being heightened language. Well, heightened language means we're going to get really interesting and specific, and we're going to use poetic tools to tell story and to reveal character.
Well, and what it does, just even in this one psalm, is it intensifies the ideas. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
Once you put yourself in it, you know, once you find the general in the particular, so to speak, and you put yourself in the story, well, now you have a responsibility. And that's one of the things that poetry can do, is it creates a demand in the reader. You have to now live with this and decide what you think about it and what you're going to do about it.
That's a great place to end our conversation. We're running out of time. We could go on like this, and will go on like this. Thanks so much, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for joining us here at Ars Biblica, the art of the Bible. Many thanks from me and Pastor Jeffrey Ernest, and we'll see you next time. We wish you knowledge and blessings for all your days.